Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic podcast. Today I am speaking with Natasja Pelgrom and Alexander Beiner.
We are not priming you with some leadership tools. And here you go. Now here is a high dose of truffles with psilocybin, and you go work on this protocol. That's not it. Of course, there is a specific type of quality that we bring forth, a type of essence that is felt that we can't say in words because we are committed and we bring in an intention. But I think everything comes down to deep listening into that space. It isn't a protocolized system again. That's really important to name.
Hey listeners, I'm so excited to have Natasja and Alexander on the podcast today. They are in the process of launching a new retreat at the intersection of psychedelics, regenerative living, and stewardship models of leadership, and looking at it through the lens of how psilocybin can help facilitate changes in how we show up and how we lead in organizations and how we lead in teams and how we lead in our lives, in family, in all these sorts of things. Natasja, we've had on the podcast before where we talked about her role as a 5-MeO-DMT facilitator and our background working together at a retreat that I started a number of years ago. So today gave us a chance to hear a little bit more from Alexander, who is a co-founder of Rebel Wisdom and also helped to lead Breaking Convention. And so Alexander adds a really articulate element to this podcast episode that I think you all will enjoy. And of course, Natasja is brilliant and beautiful as always. So without further ado, we bring you Natasja Pelgrom and Alexander Beiner. Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic podcast. Today we have quite the duo with us. We have Alexander Beiner, the co-founder of Rebel Wisdom and co-director of Breaking Convention, and Natasja Pelgrom, who is the founder of Awaken The Medicine Within, and mentors and coaches, emerging leaders in this new psychedelic paradigm. And I brought them both on today to talk about a new retreat that they're offering. But even more so than that, what the retreat represents, the why behind the retreat. It's called Regenerative Stewardship, and it is a 5-day psilocybin retreat in the Netherlands. It's really focused on emergent leadership models. So I first want to welcome you both to the show. Natasja, it's great to have you back. And Alexander, it's great to have you as a guest on the show for the first time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
So when we have a duo on like this, those who have listened before, sort of, they know how we like to approach it. The opener, just to help provide some context and anchoring, that I'd like to invite us into is sort of our relational context. So in other words, how do you two know each other? How has this relationship, been born, grown, developed, emerged? Why are we here today talking about this incredible retreat that you are planning to host for the foreseeable future?
Shall I go first, Alex?
Please do. I was hoping you would.
We're looking at each other. For those that are listening, we're looking at each other. You go first. Well, first things first. We always have to honor, the path that led us here. For the three of us, is a path of deep holding space and our love to contribute to something better to this world. So, honoring that for the three of us here. So. And then, of course, Alexander and I met in a beautiful psychedelic container, and we held space together. And for me, that was the moment where I was really observing, what does it mean to hold space? What is a space holder? What are the qualities of a balanced space holder? And I was really questioning that. And this was back in beginning of 2019. And I remember seeing Ali hold space for a group process in the retreat. And I was like, wow, what a breath of fresh air. He's got it. So that was just really inspirational. And but nothing got born in that moment. It was actually after last year, I had a 5-MeO retreat, and those that are interested in my previous journey, Paul has interviewed me in another podcast, so that will be probably in the show notes. But I had a 5-MeO retreat, and during the medicine and providing the medicine, and sometimes, of course, I work on myself, I got a very clear vision, and Ali was part of that vision, and we didn't have contact for a long time, and I just sent him a message. hey, we need to talk. I have a vision. You want to host a retreat together? And the first message came back, oh my God, yes, been thinking about that. So that was our initial get together. And I mean, we took a year literally to birth this. I mean, we've sat in ceremony together. We've explored many different avenues. We wanted to bridge Ali's talent, my talent, and then through coincidences, which I don't really see as coincidences, but let's just keep it like that, coincidences and divine alignment, regenerative stewardship came aboard with both our passion, which we'll go deeper into, but I give Alexander some opportunity to share his story with us.
Yeah, I mean, that was really beautifully shared. So I don't have so much to add to the origin, except that my feeling was very similar watching you work, and you were leading that retreat, and I was, very fittingly, perhaps for what we're talking about, really struck by and impressed by your leadership and space holding and just the level of care. And Natasja is very detail oriented as well, which I'm not. So I always have great respect for that. I was really, I really admire that. So yeah, and certainly that combination of ceremonial holding and interpersonal work is something I'm really, really interested in, and that I think is often, let's say that I think we're all birthing it as we speak. It's quite new in a sense to combine the kind of background I have, which is much more, and my training, which is much more in non-psychedelic, not therapeutic necessarily, but non-psychedelic personal growth processes, which go really deep without using drugs, which go really deep into the relational space in the kind of embodied, using movement and connection and ritual, and of course ceremony as well. That's the kind of world. Well, I come from the psychedelic world first, then I got into that world, and then I became very interested in what does a combination look like between these two worlds. And that's what I was so excited when Natasja wrote. I thought immediately, yes, this is definitely something I want to explore.
And Ali, if we could, I'd love just to flesh that background out a little bit more. I mentioned in the intro, co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, would love a little bit of context on what is Rebel Wisdom, how did that come about? I know that project also has recently come to completion. So I think that'll help create a little more context for the conversation today. And what has you mentioned personal growth, you now have psychedelics. What has you committed to the idea that psychedelics can be, phenomenal agents or catalysts for these processes of personal growth, development, things like that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So yeah, just on the background, or my background. So Rebel Wisdom was a combination of a media platform and really a retreat organization and a community and a bunch of other things as well. So we grew to have about 250,000 subscribers on YouTube, and also sort of as importantly, a really great community of people and members. So we would offer a lot of different processes, inner growth processes, dialogue practices like circling, breath work, bringing in lots of different facilitators, as well as putting out really high quality content to try and help people make sense of, and also be in the process ourselves, myself and David Fuller, the other founder, be in the process of making sense of what on earth is going on in culture right now or in the world. And we started in 2018, when it was Brexit and Trump all at the same time, right? And there was this huge shift in the landscape of what it means to be a progressive person, what it means to the role of ideology in the modern world, the role of social media in polarizing us, so many hot topic issues. And what we were trying to do is bring some of the tools of personal growth, so presence, discernment, a sense of loving the truth, and really trying to get into the process of speaking what is true in the moment beyond just my take on a topic, really using, for example, embodiment practices to feel into, hey, when I talk about COVID vaccinations, where am I feeling in my body? Like, what's my reaction in my body, rather than just whatever opinion I have? Can we get to a deeper level with each other? And that was an ongoing experiment of talking about, topics that are quite fiery and hard, but using these personal growth practices. And actually, the way we started was through running men's retreats. And so we also ran what became, I think, one of the most respected men's retreats in the world, New Masculinity Weekend. That was a really intense, very deep 2-day process. And that's really where I always feel, and I think David feels the same way, that was in many ways like the heart of Rebel Wisdom, in a sense of, not because of the masculinity in particular, just in terms of that kind of work, that kind of process of really showing up, really speaking the truth as best we know it in the moment, going beyond just the intellect into something deeper than that. Ironically, a lot of our content on YouTube was very intellectual as well. It's hard to do embodiment on YouTube. So we always had this kind of head and heart dynamic going on. Yeah.
And the head is more the interviews, the podcasts, like you said, the YouTube, and the heart, which I find is very similar, parallel in the work that we're doing with Third Wave. The heart really is the retreats, the relational experiences together, the containers that are created, which I think is a good segue then into what it is that you two have created with the Regenerative Stewardship retreat, and to start more from an intellectual and head place, and then we'll, I think, slowly throughout the podcast find our way deeper into the heart space as this opens up. Regenerative stewardship. Some people who hear that phrase, they'll either think, wow, that sounds really cutting edge and incredible, or those are just two buzzwords. What the fuck does that actually mean? I find myself somewhere in the middle at times. So I would love...
Me too.
Exactly. I would love some context on that, So Natasja, just to hand it over to you first, what that phrase regenerative stewardship, when you hear that, what comes up for you? What's alive, what's present for you with that phrase?
Yeah, I'm also personally in the middle of it, and we've really sat for a long time with how do we name this? What is our why? So let's just start with our why first, because that's how it informed the title. It's not the other way around, right? And what we both had, and where we both resonated, Alexander and I, and of course he will speak for himself, but is that from all the work that you do in personal development and growth and therapy and counseling and all the retreats and all the psychedelics, there is a stage in your development where you are going from self, you're working on self, you're working on that aspect of self, and you will come to a point where you will realize through an embodiment that the truth about harmony within is, what am I contributing outwardly? How am I making meaning? How am I contributing to purpose that goes beyond the paycheck or the profit for the employer that I'm working for or the business that I'm running? What am I contributing to the world? And I believe if we truly want to make a significant contribution, we have to realize that we each have a piece of the cake and the responsibility. So in that came the vision for myself, like, okay, if I'm going to be in contribution and I'm going to be part of changing systems and influencing systems, and because our clientele for the past years have always been people in influential positions, in a broadest sense. And they, at the end of the day, ask us, well, shall I share my sell my stocks shares and be a shaman in the woods? How do I do this? I work for a company at a law firm where being in the heart and sharing circle and taking 3 deep breaths is really foreign. How do I change that? Right? So how do I change that outward system? So that stewardship is really coming into place. Okay, I have the responsibility, I know the responsibility, and I can actually influence that. So it's going beyond self to other, to community, to society, to the larger picture of their bigger picture. right? So and then it's about, okay, what is our legacy? What are we leaving behind? Why are we doing this? If we're doing that for the bigger picture, if we're doing that for community, if we're understanding that the society that we're living in needs a change, then we need to be regenerative. We need to make sure that we leave the legacy beyond ourselves. So it's more out of the why. And what we both really didn't want and triggered by was the word, an overused leadership word, hashtag self-care, hashtag self-love. So, right, these were the buzzwords we didn't want to use. But it is very important because it is about leadership, but it goes beyond the leadership. And maybe it's even about reclaiming that word in some way, but bring in the stewardship of it and their self-responsibility. So I think that's, yeah.
I love that. And I'll take a couple notes throughout. One thing that sticks out about that frame, Natasja, is really what you're speaking to in some ways is living in this dualistic framework, right? When we have a psychedelic experience, when we have this emergence of oftentimes a soul or a mystical experience, it's hard to come back into a job, particularly a job that we don't like, or a relationship that isn't really great for us. And so that balance, so to say, of how do we live in duality and how do we continue to still show up with an emphasis on contribution and change. And I think it also speaks, like you said towards the end there, in terms of that word leader, right? The phrase leadership assumes that someone is out in front. So oftentimes, right? That's the connotation that we have. And so this concept of stewardship feels a lot more humble in a way. And it also feels a lot more as kind of this phrase, we are with you rather than above you. And it feels like that's a pretty central element of leadership, and what's emerging is the listening aspect, right? How do we cultivate that skill and develop that skill to really truly listen, not only to our partners or our colleagues, but also to the earth, and to what's emerging that is much, much greater than what we can name.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think there's this. We have this concept of the sacred in the West, about the sacred being something like, kind of an experience that takes us beyond ourselves, but very often it's interpreted as something that will take care of us. The sacred will take care of us and kind of nurture us, which of course I think is true. But in the ancient world, and in Greece in particular, there was also this very important concept that we have to look after the sacred. And I came across that through the work of Peter Kingsley, who is worth checking out for anyone listening. And that really stuck with me. That stuck with me for probably the last 2 years, that concept. It was one of those things I read and it sort of stopped me in my tracks, because it really seemed to tie into what Natasja was just talking about, which is a sense of we can work on ourselves until the cows come home, and we can optimize ourselves, and we can get better at everything in our lives and be better better in our relationships and more loving. And that's a really, really important process. But I think there is a natural point at which being in service to, or actually having the agency of actually taking care of something and stepping into a position of, that's what stewardship is. It means we're nurturing and looking after something. And I think that's a key aspect where it differs from this a traditional concept of leadership, where it's like, well, I'm going to strive and penetrate the world and do something. Now, it's not to say that sometimes we don't need to do that, but as we started developing this process and feeling into it, it became really clear, like Natasja said, that for both of us, that kind of process doesn't feel right and isn't where we're kind of feeling aligned. But a process which is much more focused on, that sense of stewardship, which is simultaneously has agency in the world, where we're really showing up in the world as us ourselves, as our unique expression, but we're in service of something bigger than us. That for me is a very different paradigm to most of what we see really in the personal growth world, and the spiritual worlds, as well as just in wider society. So for me, that's what regenerative stewardship means, and it's regenerative because it's really centered around not just growth, but regrowing something, kind of reconnecting to something that we may have lost in ourselves and socially.
There's this phrase which, Al, you may be familiar with from some of the metamodernism listening society. It's a phrase called the transvisual, which is I think apt here in terms of how do we both cultivate agency, the capacity to create in the external world, the capacity to feel in control of our existence, that we are the creator of our existence, while simultaneously holding the truth of full surrender, that we aren't in control, and that there's something much greater than us that's moving through. And what a lot of the wisdom traditions teach, and in particular Taoism teaches, is that capacity to hold paradox and sort of walk the middle way. And I feel like when we start to get into these, let's say, emerging leadership concepts, that feels very apt, right? Because in the past, let's say past 300 to 400 years, a lot of the frame has been around a more, like you said, penetrating, masculine, build without any concept for externalities, without any sort of sense of what are the second and third order consequences. And when we look at stewardship, in particular regenerative stewardship, we're really asking, what is it that wants to move through me? What is it that the land wants? What is it that this community wants? And how can I certainly be an agent of transformation for that, but also recognize that it's not at all about me and what I want. So,
absolutely. And just to add to that, in terms of the phases that is important to go into, and something that has been overly done is this the heroic journey, the hero's journey, right? And I believe it's time for us to call a different type of journey in. It's a very masculine way of looking into a process, which is, I think it had its time and its place somewhere, absolutely. And I believe there is an invitation where, if we look at what is working in our society and what isn't working in our society, it's very clear that we can name the things that isn't working. This is why the rise of this work, this is why we are doing the things that we're doing, this is why we need so much learning and healing and the access. But the most important one, I believe, is if we ask ourselves what it is to be in, from a traditional wisdom tradition sense, in right relationship to self. So what would it be to self, to right being, right? And if you are in right relationship to self, and one of the things that complex psychedelic space teaches is the connectedness, and how quickly we fall out of that connectedness is, to me, always unbelievable. It's like, wow, you're already out of it, right? It doesn't matter how much integration, we're out of it. Duality is at play here. But it's the right being is the first question we need to ask. Right being to self, right being to the outer world, right being, how am I taking that responsibility? And then the second question would be, what is your wise action? So even if, for example, we hold intention, or we speak about intention, or we speak about mantras, or we speak about prayer, I always say, imagine you're speaking to a lover. Speak in round words. And the same way, if we are coming in through right being into wise action, that's creating a non-judgmental space. And that's the basics of a deep transformative space. That's a deep basic of a deep shamanic space, is a non-judgmental space for all to be there, right? And then from there will be, okay, how is it to be in community? The willingness to be in a collaborative space, to be in a group, to see that we are part of something that is bigger, like we just shared. So I think, just wanted to add that, that I think the invitation is for look at our journeys from a slightly different perspective, from a perspective where we're coming in with yin yang simultaneously, masculine feminine qualities simultaneously, and they both need to be present in these spaces of changing systems and learning.
Yeah, just to add to that, about the hero's journey, I during COVID, I did put out a film and a kind of article about myth and how myth could help us navigate the times. And one of the people I interviewed for it was a writer called Charlotte Ducan, and she talks about the female initiation myths. So we have the hero's journey, which is a very masculine myth, right? And then she talks about how in a lot of female initiation myths, you have an inversion where actually someone starts as a princess and they go down through a process where they come back to the earth, and they come back to a lived embodied experience of being connected to the earth. And the word for humility comes from like the same root as the Latin for earth, and as does human. So we have all of this humus, kind of humility, human, this process of becoming real and human again from somewhere that's kind of detached. And then there's that process. And then, of course, there's the masculine process of really going into the world as someone who is less aware and smaller, and then going through trials and tribulations and then coming back. But also in that myth, there's a difference between being a hero and a king. And for example, if you think of Lord of the Rings, in the Aragorn starts out as a hero. He's a guy who's a king, but he doesn't want to accept that he's a king, and so he's just like out being cool and badass in the wilderness, right? And he's a hero, and it's like great, but that's kind of an adolescent, stage that you're heroic, right? And in the kind of Joseph Campbell, kind of Jungian approach to myth, the warrior and the king, all these different archetypes are kind of different to the hero. And a king, a good king or a queen, a good sovereign is able to listen, back to listening actually, is able to listen to all of the different people in the kingdom, receive their wisdom, listen to the magician, listen to whoever else, and then make a decision all by themselves. So it's, again, there's a yin and yang in that. There's the receptive listening, and then there's, okay, but ultimately, and this is, I think, true of stewardship and life in general, ultimately it comes down to you. You have to make a decision. You have to decide who you are with each choice that we make. And I think that is there's something, again, to go back to the etymology, there's something really human about that. And there's something very unspiritual bypassing that I think is very important about that kind of process, where it's not, we're going to have a big peak experience that's going to take us out of having to deal with life and out of having to show up in the world because we've sorted it all out and actually none of this is real, and we're just going to be able to detach. The kind of work and the kind of spirituality I'm interested in is much more one where we have both of those things. We have a sense of real rootedness in humanity and the nitty gritty of being alive and being in relationship and paying bills and having to make difficult decisions and not being quite sure of where the right decisions, and also a deep connection to something way beyond us that kind of fills us with energy and it's those two kinds of experience and those two aspects of being, I think, are really important to hold together. And so, yeah, I notice a lot of polarities are coming up even in this conversation. We have masculine, feminine, we have different myths, we have sort of the ground and the earth.
So when we talk about, the sort of evolution of growth, heroic hero versus king, one of my favorite philosophers, authors, regardless of how much of an asshole he is on Twitter, is Nassim Taleb. And he talks a lot about how, heroism it's a virtue of youth, so to say. And for a youth to go through that process of becoming heroic, of reaching for greatness, is actually a very healthy impetus to have. And yet there's a process of maturity that often happens, as you said, where we grow out of that phase of feeling like we need to be a hero into that king space. And what's coming up for me, even in the framing of this context, and I think it's helpful for when talking about regenerative stewardship, is just to use the example, let's say, of someone like Elon Musk. Elon Musk, I think, is a good representation of someone who is doing his best to be a hero. Making our planet and species interstellar, electric cars. And he's doing a phenomenal job, I think, of innovating in such a way that's really helping to lead this regenerative movement. At the same time, I think his perspective is sort of representative of where we are at as a culture right now, which is because so few men have really gone through, let's say, proper rites of passage. They've really gone through, they haven't really gone through that process of seeing beyond the individual ego. The most innovative things we can think of are to go to Mars. In other words, we're not really focusing time, energy, and attention on this incredible planet that we already have and really asking these difficult questions about how do we actually solve for taking care of this planet. And it feels like that's much more of a king energy, so to say, to really be objective and honest about this is the situation that we're in. There's a lot of noise about it. And what's the signal of what's actually going to change the needle? And that, I think, comes into psychedelics, right? And what psychedelics could potentially offer. Not that they're a silver bullet or a panacea necessarily. And that's sort of the next opening that I want to create for this conversation is, what is that overlap between psychedelics, indigenous wisdom, and the need for these new, let's say, models or paradigms of leadership to really root in very ancient ways of being with the earth and with our communities.
Yes. So I'm just looking who's going first. Flies and looking who's going first. We have flies being present in this podcast episode, and they taught me about patience.
Sponsored by the flies. Yeah.
I think this is a really beautiful question, and I don't know if I have the answer to it, because I think it's something that you could dedicate probably multiple episodes with multiple perspectives on it. But one thing that I do know is we miss a sense of sacredness to be able to understand metaphor. If it's one thing that I've learned out of the psychedelic space is the metaphors, the rituals. The ritual is a set of metaphors that say, this is what we're doing. This is our intention. This is where we're going with it. And we have become this autopilot of production, and to be able to understand that our deepest craving is to be in connection around a circle. That is in whatever shape or form. I mean, even watching a movie with your family members is a process that we like. Why? Because through the empathy of the emotion that we're watching, we're allowing ourselves to feel that emotion, right? So, or with the theater or with play. So the same goes with the container that is created with the right set and setting and container and holding that in a sacred way. Most importantly, we have to understand that sacredness can mean something for everybody in a different way, right? But there needs to be a threshold of a before and after, and there needs to be a slowing down. There needs to be a sense of I'm surrendering. I am letting all that is arising. I'm going to be the observer. I'm going to become self-aware of what is there, because this is also something that is lacking. So a lot of within that sacredness and within that container, this is what we create. And then when we bridge it to traditions, there are so many different traditions, but one thing that is really important, and I think especially now, of appropriation and being very mindful and working with different traditions and neo-shamanism, which I called myself for many, many years, is something that is very important. It's not about appropriating. It's about our birthright to connect to the earth and its elements and elementals. It's our birthright to be connected around the fire with fire. It's the word, how we maybe use the ritual without acknowledging and without its teachers and trainers, that we have to understand how to hold that. And then there is another aspect, is there is an actual cosmology that is taught from different traditions to hold a trance state with the group for the purpose of healing for most. For some of them, it's the purpose of spirituality, to connect to something that is bigger, the divine, right? Or God, or, whatever name, the great mystery, even. So there's these different containers, different cosmology for different settings and different intentions. There are different traditions using it in different ways. I believe what we are invited to do at this moment, and especially with psilocybin is such a generous medicine, is such a generous psychedelic substance. It's really inviting us to be able to create, let's say, a new format, a new sacred cosmology that represents the human of today. So this is what we are doing at the same time. I mean, Alexander and I have this vision, have this impulse, I personally feel guided by something bigger than myself into this program. But I also feel that there is a very big responsibility that I'm also an elder for the future, right? So what are we creating right now? I think it's a contribution of creating a sacred container. And I hope that in the next 20 years, we'll have on Sunday afternoon little communities doing creative doses together around the fire, and they're holding their own process. That would be a beautiful setting to have. So it's not only in a therapeutic work or with an intentional protocol that we've created, but that it's also really open and recreational, right? So this is also a bridge making into it. And then coming, I think the last thing about leadership, I think it bridges into this is the more we are becoming aware, and the more we can actually go towards self-actualization because our basic needs are met, right? We become aware that we are leaders, and we can create these type of containers in our communities, right? Only medicalizing this is, I believe, the opposite of what this medicine is actually asking us to do indirectly. And sometimes maybe directly in your journey. I don't know. I can only assume. But this is where I feel that there is something bigger here at play in terms of how specifically psilocybin, truffles containing psilocybin or mushrooms containing psilocybin, are generative in a way that it's inviting us to look, okay, here, what cosmology are we creating? What are we as elders in our legacy in that? So I don't know. This does not fully answer your question, Paul, but this is the seed that that came up for me, and maybe Alexander would like to add more to that.
Yeah, I would love to. And just to echo something you said when you started speaking, like, this is a huge topic. How can psychedelics basically, and how can psychedelics help us kind of navigate the world, and where does indigenous wisdom come into that as well? There's a word you've used a few times, Paul, emergence, and I think that's a really useful concept to look at to start answering a small part of that question, because it is a really big one. But emergence is something that happens in complex systems. And basically what it is when you have a system in which many different parts are interacting with each other, like an ant colony, but they're also interacting with this an open system. So they're also interacting with everything else on the savanna, and they're completely kind of in flow with everything around them. That system starts to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. And so the actual process of the different ants interacting with each other creates an intelligence, which is this ant colony, which is huge, right? It's more than, and any individual ant in that colony doesn't really have the intelligence or agency to kind of to make a decision or to be a leader, right? So so basically compare that to like a grandfather clock, which is a complicated system, right? Super complicated, it's loads of gears and stuff. But actually, if there's something wrong with the grandfather clock, you go in there and you fix it, and it's done, right? So a lot of the problems that we face in life, and more collectively, are complex problems. They're not complicated, but a lot of our solutions are the kind of solution that we have to a complicated problem. So we are looking at our own relationships. We're looking at what's going on in our organizations or in our communities, in our networks, very often with the mindset, because it's what we're educated in, of, oh, this is a problem that needs to be solved. And it might be, but it's the wrong kind of problem, because actually it's a problem that's changing as you're trying to solve it, because that's what a complex system is. It's constantly dynamic, shifting. So in order to really do that, you need a different way of being in the world. You need to be dancing with reality, and you need to be completely in flow with it. Now, that's one thing that psychedelics are incredibly good at helping us to do. When we're in a psychedelic experience, we're in a back and forth with what's going on, with their setting, with our inner world, with the people around us. And there's the only way to really navigate a psychedelic experience well, in my view, is to flow with it, is to dance with it, is to say yes, and to listen to what the medicine is saying, and then also make our own decisions and wrestle with stuff. It's a wrestle, it's a dance. So that's one way where psychedelics are such an incredible gift. Another way is that they actually give us a lived experience of what it is to be part of a complex system. And this is where it links back to indigenous wisdom. And anyone who's interested in a much better view of this than I can give, it's worth checking out the work of Tyson Yunkaporta, who wrote Sand Talk. And he talks about, in particular, Australian Aboriginal culture as having a real, very complex cosmology that understands complex systems. And it does so through observing what is going on. Why is a river moving like that? Why does a tree interact with, everything is basically interacting, speaking to everything else, if we want to use that terminology. And many indigenous knowledge systems have a recognition of a living, breathing world that's responding to us, and we're responding to it. That is not the world that we're taught about in the West, because our world is one in which there is no life in nature. It's dead matter. And by extension, we are dead matter. And our consciousness is a fluke, and none of us are real. And so, of course, why not just consume blindly and make the most of it until we burn away? That, I think, is not just a wrong view of the world, but I think it's completely toxic. And a lot of leadership models based in that view of the world are also toxic. And so that's, again, comes back to something like regenerative stewardship as a concept. It's much more about a way of showing up in a world that is showing up to us, and we're moving with it rather than trying to tell it what to do.
So there's a sense of presence with the emergence, and not necessarily a projected expectation about how this is how it should be. Rather, we're observing, we're being with it, we're allowing it. And again, what I continue to come back to as a term is like, we're listening to it. And that's often, for me, it's always been the biggest lesson with psychedelics has been the capacity for listening to transform my relationship with everything. And that, I know it's not as common. You both are across the pond. Ali, I think you're in London. And Natasja's in the Netherlands. So listening is more of a thing in many European cultures. In American culture, there is this really annoying sort of white man's egotistical drive that everyone is adapted to about just talking. And there is a sense of, in that capacity, to fully step back and really listen. Like you said, we realize that consciousness is in everything, that we don't live in a dead sort of world where there is no meaning, but that instead meaning is imbued into absolutely everything around us. It's just our capacity to sort of take off the blinders, if you will, and really observe things for what they are. Natasja, did you have anything to add to just what Ali mentioned?
Yeah, well, actually, to what you mentioned about deep listening, because I think that's in the end where we really learning. It's we're speaking a lot about healing in terms of psychedelic and plant medicines, and in its core, I think it's about learning and learning to deeply listen. So, and even in the program itself, I mean, we're speaking here, and we're making a lot of suggestions, and we're looking things in different viewpoints. But I think it's also really important to understand that the container that we do hold, we deeply listened to what it is that the individual needs, right? We are not priming you with some leadership tools and here you go. Now here is a high dose of truffles with psilocybin and you go work on this protocol. That's not it. That's not how we envision it. So the deep listening is also in the relational space between our facilitation and the individual, and then the group coherence, the group consciousness that is at play, and where is everybody at the level that they're at. And that's where we try to meet people. And we share stories and we bring invitations, and we, of course, there is a specific type of quality that we bring forth, a type of essence that is felt that we can't say in words. Of course, that is going to be there because we are committed and we bring in an intention. But I think everything comes down to deep listening into that space. It isn't a protocolized system again. That's really important to name.
Yeah, formulas are dead on arrival has been
Yes.
kind of my frame, right? Where everything is an emergent living thing. Let's be with that rather than try to box it or put a formula into it or create a protocol for it, right? The Western mind is very conditioned to want certainty. And oftentimes what psychedelics teach us is life is way more uncertain, and the ability to dance with that uncertainty is actually what defines us as living creatures.
Mm.
So I have a bit of a tactical question regarding the retreat, and Natasja, you've facilitated a lot in the past 5 years, like a lot of experiences, maybe even 6 to 7 years. You've done both 5-MeO DMT and psilocybin. There could be other medicines that you've worked with as well. And so this is a bit of a two-part question. First of all, why psilocybin compared to something like 5-MeO DMT for this retreat model when it comes to regenerative stewardship? And secondly, if all of these medicines were currently legal everywhere, and you could choose from ayahuasca or wachuma or MDMA or 2CB or I don't know, any other medicine, would you still choose psilocybin as ideal for this sort of leadership experiential model, or would there be another substance that may be ideal for your intention and what it is that you're creating?
I love that question. Never been asked before. My straight answer would be I would personally, I don't know about Alexander, but I would still choose psilocybin, actually. And it's like, I will keep it very simple to not to go too much into 5-MeO and that journey, but just simply put, is 5-MeO picks your consciousness up and drops it in the soup of big consciousness. Okay? Psilocybin creates bridges into that consciousness, into the big consciousness, with story and relating and somatic and color and vision and aha and emotion and all of the senses that we can experience. Because of that process, the unfolding and the aha in the moment itself, it's let's say, like clay, you can work more with it in the moment. 5-MeO is very clearly a very quick experience, which you work with in the 3-6 months to a year on yourself. You start to realize, have insight, etc. So to work with this intention, and this specific commitment that we're bringing in, psilocybin is more generative, is more flexible, is more playful too. And we have to bring in the qualities of psilocybin. There is a playful, it will poke you in your shadow, at the same time crack a joke about it. Right? And so for a lot of people that are also curious about because half of the people that are actually now enrolling to this program are first timers as well. And I really don't believe, I think 5-MeO you need to be called really to do, like any of the medicines. But I think for a first timer, and also with this type of program, the type of people that feel attracted to it, it fits really well the combination of the work. And then speaking about other medicines, well, when it comes to, for example, ayahuasca, I'm pretty strict personally on that. I think you should be trained with traditionally for a minimum of 10 years with that medicine. So I would never serve that unless I have invited to go for 10 years and do a shitload of dietas and have a really good teacher, which we work also a lot with people that have done all of that and their medicine isn't, let's name it crooked. So we've, helped people actually unplug from a lot of those teachings too. So I've seen the shadow aspect of that work as much as anything else. So I personally don't feel drawn to work with anything else. And I think, sometimes I question myself, shouldn't I dedicate myself to one medicine? That's already enough for a lifetime, but this is what happened in my life. This is how, I started integrating 5-MeO with truffles in the Netherlands. So, the truffles helped me understand what was happening in my 5-MeO experience. So this is why both were so complementary in my life. But that's my personal story about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have a strong clarity that I would use psilocybin regardless of what else was available. And that's also in part, like Natasja just said, it's a personal story, but I think that's very important because for me personally, it's the medicine that I'm closest to in terms of a student to teacher relationship. It's always for me been a real, that has been the key, plant medicine, if we want to call it that, although fungi isn't really a plant. It's been the key kind of spiritual relationship in my life. Actually, would be, I would say, between me and the wisdom of psilocybin. It's also what I know how to work with, rather than, like Natasja said, that I would never work with ayahuasca. I'm not trained to do that. I wouldn't work with MDMA, even though I have experienced MDMA myself many times. That's a very different way of working, and people have experience of doing that. One exception may be LSD, where I think it would be long. So again, it would be a very different type of process and container, and possibly we might want to, it would be different. I think I would probably want to go outside at some point as well. So that's the one exception I would say. And in some ways, both of those medicines are indigenous to Europe, where I'm from. I suppose LSD is indigenous to Switzerland, and of course belongs to everyone. Psilocybin grows here and can be picked, and that's something that I've done, and so it's I feel that kind of connection to it. Not that connection must, by all accounts, be there if someone to work with a medicine, but I think at least I think it really does matter. It really does matter that connection is there and that reverence is there for with that reverence and with that personal experience with a medicine comes an understanding of the way that it teaches, and that is really crucial for the way that we hold a container.
LSD at, let's say, a more moderate dose level, 50 to 100 to maybe even 150 mics, would probably be very good for creativity, problem solving, new ideas, right? It feels like the intention of this retreat and this experience is much deeper and more profound than that necessarily. And so it's a different lens on leadership, right? It's bringing, as we've talked about throughout the conversation today, bringing people much more into a deep embodied experience of emergence and of cooperation and of interbeing, and and then using that almost frame that experience as, let's say, a launching pad, for lack of a better term, for the shifts that will inevitably come after the experience. And I think that to me is a great, let's say, final question to land this is, in terms of the flow, right, Natasja, we were involved in a retreat together for some time. You host your own retreats. There's a pretty standard prep experience integration, and that pretty standard prep experience integration, it's typically oriented for, at least with the retreats that we did, they were more like wellness retreats. They didn't have necessarily the specific lens of leadership. So I'd love if you could just talk a little bit, and Ali, maybe I'll go to you just first, and then Natasja can kind of land after you. How do you think about prep experience and integration as it relates to this retreat, as it relates to leadership, as it relates to regenerative stewardship? So to say, how just even for those who are listening at home and who are thinking about these new models of leadership, who are maybe just going to work with medicine themselves, how might they approach that frame to prepare for an experience, to have it themselves, and then to integrate afterwards within this context of embodiment, of stewardship, of listening, these sorts of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't want to lay out a sort of a protocol for people to do at home, but I will talk about the general kind of ethos of it. I mean, and the first thing I would say is that these different aspects, the preparation, actually being in the space, and then being in the ceremony, and then integrating afterwards, they're all one thing that's connected with itself, right? So I think that's a good way to think about it. It's all one process. And I think the word process is also really, really important, because process implies a kind of a kind of a journey and growth and a constant change and a constant unfolding that just isn't really ever end in some sense. We can have closure over a particular aspect of things, but it's also non-linear. Like, for example, I've had experiences, psychedelic experiences, which I integrated, so to speak, a year and a half later, sitting on a couch and just being like, oh my God, And, it wasn't that I was like necessarily working intensely on that particular issue for a whole year and a half. It was just like maybe in the back of my mind, okay, what did this mean when this happened in that experience? And like every now and again, it would be kind of gnawing at me, and I kind of wrestle. A lot of the process, in my view, of good psychedelic integration is patience, and also, deep listening, we've talked about, and allowing things to, like, being okay with not quite knowing, and wrestling. So just sequentially, I mean, the preparation can involve many different things, but I think something we're really keen on is a couple of different elements, which is, one is embodiment, one is learning how to come into a lived experience of our bodies, because there's many reasons for that. One reason is because it's a very firm anchor into the present moment. It's also a way we can regulate ourselves and come into ourselves, regulate our nervous systems, know ourselves. Also, during an experience, it's really important way of checking in with, okay, what's going on? Because what's going on isn't just the mental content, it's also the somatic, so the body experience of what's going on. And very often we're not trained to do both of those things at the same time and to kind of feel fully. Very often we're moving away from feeling our emotions. We're numbing out, we're trying to bypass it with, lofty ideas. And one thing that psilocybin does often is bring us straight into the feeling, and that means going straight into the body. And so getting used to that in preparation, I think, is really, really important. And then also some basics of how do we navigate an altered state. And that is really a way of being that we start to learn like a muscle rather than something we necessarily do. It's about a kind of mental flexibility, a kind of humor, a kind of awareness that everything is constantly in process and changing, and that might be really heightened during a psychedelic experience. And then one aspect of integration, which is a very big topic, which incidentally no one has really defined what integration is in any of the academic literature. So, we're using a word, all of us, that is we're kind of defining as we go along. But one thing is not immediately jumping to making meaning right after the experience, which is what our minds want to do. And it's okay that they want to do that, but actually getting into a different kind of knowing, which again comes into the body, again comes into being able to slow down, being able to listen, That's really, really important, because we are effectively breaking our frame on reality, and our frame on the world, and then making a new frame, and we have a big experience. And we need to be very careful as we make the new frame that's usually wider and more inclusive, and we see more of reality, ideally, that we are very careful and cautious and discerning as we do that. And so that's for me, a major part of integration. There's many, many, many more, but I'm going to pass over to Natasja.
Mm. Yes, and from a practical perspective, everything we offer, we because we do 3 preparation calls and 3 integration calls after a 5-day experience, and from a practical sense, creating a container that feels safe and that you can trust and drop into self and each other is with practicality. So we are everything we're sharing here. We're very aware that working in a trauma-informed way and working with the nervous system is saying, okay, here's the exit. This is what you do here, like bringing also these practical, simple elements and creating connections. So we're very much, in the preparatory phase and relating, connecting, structure. These are the basics of the foundation. And then we're going to invite our group to immediately dive deep. We've switched around a lot of the formats that have now been copied from the container we created, Paul. We've switched that whole format. We've switched it completely around because we want to also be in innovation. We don't want to stick with something, oh, this is the format that worked. We're already in a very different place. So we're immediately going to dive deep. And then psilocybin is one of the main, let's say, medicines, but we're also working with flower essence, we're working with cacao, but all from a slightly different perspective than what most people think when they hear that. When I say cacao ceremony, most people think we're going to go and sing Kumbaya around the flower mandala, but we're actually going to do and learn a lot about the archetypes within what is imbalance, what is out of balance, how to create balance. We're going to use a lot of the formats also that Alexander and the rest of the team, because it's not only myself and Alexander. I mean, we have an amazing team of very highly skilled executive trainers, change makers, and coaches that have a decade of experience in the plant medicine psychedelic space, who are bridging both worlds. Because if we're speaking into this, we have to have embodied understanding of what we're speaking into. Right. And it's not only Natasja and Alexander, it's a whole team. It's the fullness of everything we're bringing in. And then we're really emphasizing halfway the 5 days on starting already a form of integration. And then again, what Alexander said, not about meaning making, but how can we go from adultion self into adult self? Right? And what does that mean? What does that ownership mean? What does that responsibility mean? What does it mean to step out of victim aggressor role? What does it mean to be indeed the leader that you want to be in your life? And it's not for your paycheck, it's for your life. It's maybe for your family. It's for what you're contributing into your household, into your community. So those aspects, we're also bringing in a lot of those kind of inquiries, what it means to each and every one. And the craft of space holding is about deep listening and understanding how to weave in the right way. And I feel this is let's say, the sacred feminine at play with the sacred masculine at play, right? Where both come in, where we're weaving together in the container. Okay, what is present and what are we inviting in? And then it will grow out of itself. It's also we're planting seeds, but we need to be in a place of non-attachment, really, to be able for individuals to grow into that aha moment. And we are there as observers and witness to say it is so, right? In this space. And then the integration process is indeed, it's very... I've tried 100 times making protocols for integration, and every time I think I got it, every group teaches me that I have no idea again. I've tried to actually make an integration program for people, easy access, low cost, just get it out there for so many people as possible. But every group that I'm holding, I'm realizing that one group has one theme, and another group has another theme. So again, flexibility in that is needed, and and really much needed in terms of you need to monitor what do people need. Is there extra support that is needed? Is there extra counseling or coaching, or you need to direct people in a certain space? But for one person, more meditation is not really what they need. Really, they need actually, maybe change their diet. So we need to stay open in that aspect. So that's more or less the journey in terms of from beginning to end. But we have switched it around from the formats that are now alive. That I can say, we have switched it completely around in terms of when you do what in the process, and I'm pretty psyched about it, actually.
Yeah, likewise.
Beautiful. Well, as a time check, Ali, I know you gotta pop and get going. So I wanna thank both of you for coming on today. We could probably talk for another hour, if not 2, if not 3. There's a lot here to unpack, to go through, and it's always a pleasure, Natasja, to be able to do this with you. And Ali, it was great to have you on and to go through all of this. So Natasja, just in terms of final details, if people want to learn more about this experience and this retreat, if they are interested potentially in attending one of the retreats, just, kind of where do we point them? Where can they find more information?
Yeah, so our website is Awaken the Medicine Within, but if you want to go directly to the landing page, it's stewardship.awakenthemedicinewithin.com. So that's where you can find us. So our first retreat with this program is completely sold out, fully booked. So our next one would be in March 2023, and we're launching this in the Netherlands. We're starting with a maximum of 12 participants to really be able to cater to individuals. And, on the website, it says everything. There is an enrollment process. We actually do in-person calls. So it's nothing automated. We have a conversation with everybody one-to-one for questions and answers and all of that in between.
Beautiful. Well, we will post all of those in the show links. If you want to find out more about the experience and the retreat, you can do so there. Again, just as a final thank you. I know it's late in Europe, so appreciate both of you taking the time to come on today and talk about regenerative stewardship and emerging models of leadership and listening and liminality, and there's a ton that we went through. So this is super rich and nourishing.
Thank you, Paul. Really. Super grateful.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having us. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.